everyone! If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
My biggest secret. What if I told you that after living in the United States for more than 20 years, I still make English mistakes almost every single day? Yet I have a happy marriage, wonderful children, trusted friends, a peaceful home, and a life that feels more complete than I ever imagined? Would you think I was hiding something? Would you believe that broken English did not break my future? Or would you stay for a few more minutes to discover the secret that completely changed the way I see language, success, and happiness? If you have ever felt embarrassed when speaking English, afraid of making mistakes, or ready to quit learning because you think you are too late, then this story may feel strangely personal. It is not about becoming fluent overnight. It is about building a whole life while your English is still beautifully imperfect. 20 years sounds like a very long time. When people hear that number, they usually expect a dramatic ending. They expect me to say that now I sound exactly like a Native American speaker. They expect perfect pronunciation, impressive vocabulary, and conversations that flow without a single pause. I wish I could tell you that story. But that would not be my story. My real story is much more surprising. Even today, I still stop in the middle of a sentence to search for a word. I still confuse expressions that everyone else seems to understand instantly. Sometimes I even laugh at my own grammar mistakes before anyone else does. Yet somehow, my life became richer every year, not because my English became perfect, but because I finally stopped waiting for perfection before living. I am a wife. I am a mother. I live an ordinary life in America, and maybe that is exactly why this story matters. Every morning begins with simple routines. I make breakfast. I remind my children about school. I smile at my neighbors. I chat with the cashier at the grocery store. None of these moments require perfect English. They require kindness, patience, eye contact, and the courage to keep talking even when my sentences are not beautiful. That realization changed everything. I spent years believing that language was the door to life. Then one day, I realized life itself was teaching me the language. One afternoon, something happened that I will never forget. I was standing in line at a local bakery, trying to order bread. I accidentally used the wrong word, and the young employee looked confused for a second. Years ago, that moment would have ruined my entire day. I would have replayed the mistake again and again in my head. But this time, something different happened. The employee smiled warmly, guessed what I meant, and said, "Don't worry. I understood you." We both laughed. The conversation continued. I walked out with fresh bread and a lighter heart. It lasted less than 2 minutes, but it quietly destroyed a fear that had followed me for years. Most people are not waiting for you to fail. Most people simply want to understand you. That lesson became even more meaningful inside my own home. My husband never measured my love by my grammar. My children never counted how many mistakes I made while reading bedtime stories. They remembered that I showed up every day. They remembered the hugs, the dinners, the conversations, and the laughter around our table. Looking back, I realized something almost funny. I spent years correcting my English while my family was quietly reminding me that they had never asked for perfection in the first place. Modern psychology explains something interesting about this. Researchers have found that people build trust far more through warmth, consistency, and genuine attention than through flawless communication. In everyday conversations, confidence and sincerity often matter more than perfect vocabulary. That does not mean English is unimportant. It means language is a bridge, not the destination. The bridge helps people meet each other, but it is kindness that makes them stay. That realization completely changed the way I practiced English. I stopped treating every conversation like an exam. Instead, I treated each conversation as another chance to connect with another human being. I listened more carefully. I spoke a little more slowly. I accepted that making mistakes was simply proof that I was still growing. Ironically, the less afraid I became of making mistakes, the more naturally my English improved. Living in the United States also taught me something many people outside America misunderstand. People often imagine that everyone here speaks perfectly, lives perfectly, and succeeds perfectly. The truth is much more human. America is full of different accents, different cultures, different backgrounds, and different stories. Every day, millions of people communicate with imperfect English. What often matters most is showing respect, being honest, arriving on time, keeping your promises, and treating others with dignity. Those values open more doors than perfect pronunciation ever could. So if you clicked on this video expecting a success story about mastering English after 20 years, you may be surprised. My biggest achievement is not sounding like someone else. My biggest achievement is finally becoming comfortable sounding like myself. My English is still broken in many ways. My confidence is not. My family is not. My hope is not. And as this journey continues, I want to show you how a broken language slowly helped me build a whole happy life in America, one imperfect conversation at a time. The day I stopped pretending. The strangest part of my life is not that my English is still imperfect after more than 20 years in America. The strangest part is that the day I finally stopped pretending to be someone I was not was the exact day my life began to feel lighter. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning, not during a big celebration, not after passing an English exam, and certainly not after suddenly becoming fluent. It happened while I was standing in my own kitchen, looking at a sink full of breakfast dishes, listening to my children laugh upstairs, and realizing I had spent years trying to impress strangers while forgetting to enjoy the family I had already built. That morning changed everything because I asked myself one question that was both painfully simple and impossible to ignore. Who was I trying so hard to impress? The answer was uncomfortable. It was not my husband. It was not my children. It was not my neighbors. It was mostly the voice inside my own head that kept whispering, "Your English isn't good enough." For years that voice followed me everywhere. When I answered the phone, it appeared. When I ordered coffee, it appeared. When another parent started talking to me at a school event, it appeared again. Every conversation secretly became a test, and every mistake felt like another reason to stay quiet. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't afraid of English. I was afraid of being judged. That fear is surprisingly common. Psychologists often explain that adults are much more sensitive to embarrassment than children because our brains become better at predicting social rejection. Children happily make hundreds of language mistakes every week without thinking twice. Adults often stop speaking after only one mistake because they imagine everyone is paying attention. The funny truth is that most people are thinking about themselves, not about us. That realization slowly became my freedom. My husband noticed the change before I did. One evening he smiled and said, "You're laughing more these days." I laughed because he was right. Nothing magical had happened to my vocabulary. My grammar was still far from perfect. The only difference was that I had stopped apologizing every time I opened my mouth. Instead of saying, "Sorry, my English is bad," I simply spoke. If I forgot a word, I described it another way. If I made a mistake, I corrected myself and continued. Surprisingly, conversations became easier. People relaxed because I was relaxed. A confidence, I discovered, is often more contagious than perfect pronunciation. My daily life in America suddenly looked different. At the grocery store, I chatted with the cashier instead of rushing away. At my children's school, I stayed after meetings to talk with other parents instead of quietly walking to my car. At neighborhood gatherings, I smiled more, listened carefully, and realized something beautiful about American culture. Most people appreciate honesty more than perfection. They respect people who make an effort. They value kindness, reliability, and sincerity. Those qualities create friendships much faster than a perfect accent ever could. That lesson surprised me because many people outside the United States imagine that Americans expect flawless English. My experience has been almost the opposite. Of course, clear communication matters, but everyday life is filled with different accents, different cultures, and different ways of speaking. What truly matters is respect, personal responsibility, keeping your word, arriving on time, and treating people with dignity. Those values shape relationships much more deeply than grammar rules. One afternoon, my daughter accidentally became my greatest teacher without even knowing it. We were reading a story together when I mispronounced a word. I stopped and smiled awkwardly. She looked at me, giggled, and simply repeated the word correctly. Then she hugged me and said, "It's okay, Mom. We're both still learning." Her words stayed with me long after that evening. Children never expect perfection from the people they love. They expect presence. They expect patience. They expect honesty. Somewhere along the way, I realized I should give myself the same kindness that my children gave me every single day. That decision completely changed how I practiced English. I stopped chasing impossible perfection and started building consistent habits instead. Every morning I read a few pages from an easy English book. Every afternoon I listened to slow conversations while cooking dinner. Every evening I spoke a little more than I had spoken the day before. Some days I improved. Some days I forgot words I had already learned. Both days counted because progress is rarely dramatic. It is usually quiet enough that you almost miss it. That is why so many people quit too early. They mistake slow progress for no progress at all. Today, if someone asks whether my English is perfect, I smile without embarrassment. I tell them the truth. No, it isn't. But my marriage is stronger than ever. My children know they are deeply loved. My home is full of laughter. My confidence no longer depends on speaking without mistakes. And perhaps that is the greatest surprise hidden inside this story. I did not build a beautiful life after fixing my English. I built a beautiful life while my English was still wonderfully, unmistakably imperfect. Love heard my heart. If you had met my husband and me during one of our ordinary conversations, you probably would not have guessed that people once quietly wondered how our marriage could possibly work. Some heard my hesitant English and assumed our communication must be difficult. Others smiled politely, but looked surprised that we laughed so much together. They believed happiness depended on perfect conversations. They were wrong. The strongest part of our relationship was never built with perfect sentences. It was built with thousands of imperfect moments that slowly became a beautiful life. Looking back now, I think one of the biggest myths people believe is that successful marriages are created by people who always know exactly what to say. Real life is much messier than that. Sometimes the right words never arrive. Sometimes love speaks first, and language catches up much later. That lesson changed the way I looked at both English and marriage forever. One evening after dinner, my husband asked me a simple question about our weekend plans. I misunderstood almost everything he said. I answered with complete confidence, and after a few seconds we both realized we were talking about two completely different things. Years earlier, I would have felt embarrassed. I probably would have apologized 5 or 6 times before becoming quiet for the rest of the evening. Instead, I started laughing so hard that I could barely breathe. My husband laughed with me, repeated the question more slowly, and within a minute everything was clear. The conversation was ordinary, but the feeling was extraordinary. I finally understood that mistakes no longer frighten me because I completely trusted the person standing in front of me. That trust had become stronger than my fear. Experts who study long-term relationships often explain that emotional safety is one of the most important foundations of a healthy marriage. When people feel emotionally safe, they're willing to admit confusion, ask questions, and make mistakes without fearing rejection. I realized our home had quietly become that kind of place. It was not perfect. We disagreed sometimes. We became tired. We misunderstood each other. But we always returned to the same simple habit: listening before judging. That habit solved far more problems than perfect English ever could. Living in the United States also taught me something that surprised me about everyday relationships. American families often encourage open conversations, even when those conversations are uncomfortable. It is normal to talk honestly about responsibilities, emotions, schedules, parenting, or financial goals. At first I worried because I did not always have the vocabulary to explain exactly what I felt. Then I discovered something unexpected. Simple words spoken sincerely often carried more power than complicated sentences spoken without emotion. I'm worried. I need help. Thank you. I'm proud of you. I love you. Those short sentences became some of the strongest sentences in our marriage. They were easy to say, easy to understand, and impossible to forget. My husband also taught me a lesson that completely changed my confidence. Whenever I stopped speaking because I was searching for the perfect word, he never rushed to finish my sentence. He waited patiently. At first I wondered why. One day he smiled and said, "I'm listening to you, not grading you." I still remember those 8 words because they quietly erased years of unnecessary pressure. From that day forward, I stopped imagining every conversation as an English test. Instead, I saw every conversation as an opportunity to know another person a little better. Ironically, the less pressure I placed on myself, the more naturally my English continued to improve. Our children noticed something changing too. Family dinners became longer because everyone enjoyed talking. Sometimes I mixed up words and my children gently corrected me with huge smiles on their faces. Sometimes they asked me to explain stories from my childhood, and I realized they cared much more about hearing my voice than hearing perfect grammar. Those evenings became my favorite English lessons because they never felt like lessons. They felt like family. Cognitive scientists often explain that language is remembered more effectively when it is connected to emotion. Happy conversations, meaningful experiences, and personal stories create stronger memories than isolated vocabulary lists. Without realizing it, my family had created the perfect classroom. Every meal, every holiday, every road trip, every birthday celebration quietly strengthened both my relationships and my English at the same time. That is why I rarely tell people to memorize hundreds of difficult words first. I tell them to begin with conversations that matter. Language grows faster when the heart is involved. There is another important lesson I wish someone had told me years ago. In America, people come from every corner of the world. Different accents fill schools, hospitals, offices, restaurants, and neighborhoods every single day. Perfect pronunciation is far less important than showing respect, listening carefully, and communicating with genuine kindness. Once I accepted that reality, I stopped trying to sound like someone else. I started sounding like myself, and strangely enough, that was the version of me people connected with most easily. Today, when I look across the dinner table at my husband, I no longer think about grammar mistakes I made years ago. I think about the thousands of conversations we almost didn't have because I was afraid of speaking imperfectly. I'm grateful that fear did not win. My English is still growing, still changing, and still imperfect. But my marriage reminds me every single day that the most important conversations in life are never measured by flawless language. They are measured by honesty, patience, laughter, forgiveness, and love. Those are the words that built our family, and they continue to speak clearly, even when my English does not. Our home was built slowly. People sometimes ask me the question that always makes me smile. What was the hardest part of building a happy family in America? They expect me to answer with something dramatic. Maybe my English. Maybe cultural differences. Maybe money. Maybe marriage itself. But the real answer surprises almost everyone. The hardest part was learning that a happy home is never built during the exciting moments. It is built during the ordinary ones that nobody posts online. That truth took me years to understand. One rainy Saturday morning, I looked around my kitchen after breakfast. There were dirty dishes waiting in the sink, children's backpacks on the floor, laundry that seemed to multiply every hour, and my husband fixing a loose cabinet door while quietly humming his favorite song. Nothing about that morning looked impressive. Yet something inside me whispered, "This is happiness." I almost laughed because 20 years earlier I believed happiness would arrive only after I finally spoke perfect English. Instead, happiness had quietly arrived while I was busy worrying about grammar. That realization completely changed the way I measured success. My life was already full. I had simply been looking in the wrong direction. One afternoon, something small happened that taught me one of the biggest lessons of my marriage. I accidentally misunderstood my husband's text message about picking up groceries. I bought the wrong items, forgot two important things, and even came home with the wrong brand of milk. Years ago, I would have blamed my English and spent the rest of the evening feeling guilty. Instead, my husband smiled, opened the refrigerator, and jokingly said, "Well, I guess we're trying something new tonight." We laughed together while making dinner with whatever we had. That simple moment reminded me that happy couples are not people who avoid mistakes. They are people who refuse to let small mistakes become big problems. Relationship researchers often describe this as emotional resilience. Strong couples recover from misunderstandings quickly because they choose cooperation over blame. Looking back now, I realize we practiced that habit without even noticing it. We learned to ask one simple question before becoming frustrated. What did you really mean? That question saved us from countless unnecessary arguments. It also helped my English improve because instead of pretending I understood everything, I became comfortable asking for clarification. Surprisingly, people usually appreciated that honesty. Living in the United States also taught me practical lessons that made family life stronger. Time is respected. Promises matter. Personal space is valued. Parents are encouraged to communicate openly with teachers, neighbors, and healthcare providers. At first, I worried that my imperfect English would make these responsibilities impossible. Instead, I discovered that preparation mattered far more than perfection. I wrote short notes before important conversations. I practiced key phrases while driving. I listened carefully before answering. These tiny habits reduced my stress and slowly increased my confidence. Psychologists explain that repeating small successful experiences gradually changes how the brain responds to fear. Every ordinary conversation became another quiet victory. My children noticed these changes long before I did. They stopped seeing me as someone worried about making mistakes. They saw a mother who kept trying. One evening, my youngest child watched me searching for the right English word during dinner. Instead of correcting me immediately, my child patiently waited until I finished speaking. Then came a sentence that touched my heart forever. "Mom, I always understand what you mean." Those words stayed with me because they reminded me of something many English learners forget. Communication is not a performance. It is a connection. If people understand your heart, they often forgive your grammar. That does not mean we stop learning. It means we stop allowing fear to control our lives. Today my home is still wonderfully ordinary. We still laugh over funny misunderstandings. We still help each other after difficult days. My English is still improving one conversation at a time. But our family no longer waits for perfect conditions before enjoying life. We celebrate birthdays, cook together, solve problems together, and create memories together with the language we have today, not the language we hope to have tomorrow. Looking around my home now, I finally understand the secret that took me 2 decades to learn. A strong family is not built with perfect words. It is built with patient hearts, daily kindness, shared responsibility, and the courage to keep talking even when every sentence is not perfect. My English may still be broken in places, but the home we built together has never felt more complete. And perhaps that is the most beautiful sentence my life has ever written. My children became my teachers. The funniest English teacher I have ever had has never stood in a classroom, never carried a grammar book, and never gave me a single test. That teacher calls me Mom. The first time I realized my own children were quietly changing the way I learned English, I almost cried, not because I felt embarrassed, but because I suddenly understood that I had been searching for complicated learning methods while the best classroom had been waiting around my own dinner table all along. Every evening our house filled with ordinary conversations about homework, school projects, funny stories, soccer practice, forgotten lunches, birthday invitations, and weekend plans. Nothing sounded extraordinary, yet those simple moments slowly transformed both my English and my confidence. One evening, my youngest child walked into the kitchen holding a science project and excitedly explained how plants grow toward sunlight. I listened carefully, smiled, and tried to answer, but I accidentally used the wrong word. We all paused for a second. Years ago, that silence would have felt painful. This time something completely different happened. My child smiled, gently repeated the correct word, and then continued the conversation as if nothing unusual had happened. There was no judgment, no laughter at my mistake, no awkward feeling, only patience. At that moment, I realized children often teach language the way adults should. They encourage first and correct second. That small experience changed the atmosphere inside our home forever. Instead of hiding my mistakes, I allowed them to become part of our conversations. Surprisingly, my children became even more willing to ask questions when they made mistakes themselves. Without planning it, our family created a simple rule. Nobody needed to be perfect before speaking. Modern language researchers explain that this kind of relaxed environment lowers anxiety, allowing the brain to remember vocabulary and expressions more effectively. Looking back now, I believe that principle changed my life more than any expensive English course ever could. Family conversations became natural listening practice every single day. While driving to school, I listened to my children discuss their favorite books, movies, and dreams. During dinner, we shared one interesting thing that happened during the day. Before bedtime, we often read short English stories together. These routines never felt like homework. They felt like family life, and perhaps that is exactly why they worked so well. I also discovered something fascinating about life in the United States. Many American families encourage children to express opinions openly, ask respectful questions, and participate in everyday conversations regardless of age. At first, I worried that my slower English would make it difficult to keep up. Instead, my children naturally slowed down, explained unfamiliar words, and patiently waited for me to finish speaking. They were not trying to teach me English. They were simply communicating with someone they loved. That difference made learning feel safe instead of stressful. One afternoon, my daughter looked at me and asked a question I will never forget. "Mom, why do you always smile when you forget an English word now?" I laughed because I remembered a very different version of myself. Years earlier, I would have become quiet, frustrated, and disappointed. Now I simply smiled, searched for another way to explain my idea, and continued talking. I answered honestly, because forgetting one word doesn't mean I have nothing to say. She smiled back and nodded, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. Maybe it was. Psychologists often say that children learn resilience by watching adults respond to mistakes. Without realizing it, my attitude toward English was teaching my children something much bigger than vocabulary. I was teaching them that confidence is not the absence of mistakes. Confidence is the decision to keep going after making them. That lesson reached far beyond language. It became part of our family culture. Today, when I hear laughter around our dinner table, I no longer wonder whether my English sounds perfect. I wonder whether my children feel heard, supported, and loved. The answer is yes. My English still has mistakes. My children still correct me sometimes. We still laugh together almost every day. And somehow those imperfect conversations have become the strongest lessons of my entire life. Looking back, I no longer believe I raised my children alone. In many beautiful ways, they quietly raised me too. They taught me patience, courage, humility, and one unforgettable truth. A home filled with love will always be the best place to learn any language. Because the words spoken there are remembered not by the mind alone, but by the heart. 20 years still learning. If I told you there was one habit that quietly stole years of my progress, you might think it was laziness. It wasn't. You might think it was a lack of talent. It wasn't that either. The real reason was much more dangerous because millions of English learners experience it without realizing it. I believed I had to sound perfect before I deserved to sound confident. That single belief followed me for years like an invisible shadow. Every time I opened my mouth, I secretly judged myself before anyone else had the chance. Looking back now, I almost wish someone had stopped me much earlier and whispered one simple sentence into my ear. Your English is not the reason you're afraid. Your fear is the reason your English stays trapped. The day I finally understood that difference became another turning point in my life. After more than 20 years in America, I still make grammar mistakes. Sometimes I still forget simple words that I know I learned years ago. Occasionally I pronounce something incorrectly, catch myself, smile, and keep talking. Years ago, those moments felt like proof that I had failed. Today they feel like proof that I am still learning. That tiny shift completely changed the way I live. One quiet Sunday afternoon, while organizing old family photos, I found a notebook where I had written English vocabulary many years earlier. Every page was filled with carefully copied words, grammar rules, and long lists I had promised myself I would memorize. I smiled because I could barely remember studying most of them. Then I looked around the living room. Family photographs covered the shelves. My children had grown taller. My husband was reading a book on the couch. Suddenly, I realized something that almost made me laugh. I had forgotten hundreds of vocabulary words over the years, but I had never forgotten the conversations that mattered. I still remember my children's first school presentations. I remembered helping with homework. I remembered family vacations, birthday dinners, and late-night talks around the kitchen table. My memory had quietly chosen emotion over memorization. Neuroscientists explain that the human brain stores information more effectively when it is connected to meaningful experiences and positive emotions. That discovery explained my entire journey. I learned far more English by living than by worrying. Instead of chasing thousands of isolated words, I slowly built language through everyday life. Every conversation became another brick. Every mistake became another lesson. Every smile became another reason to continue. I also learned something important about adult learning that many people never hear. Children's brains naturally absorb language because they are not afraid of sounding foolish. Adults often slow their own progress because they monitor every sentence before speaking. Psychologists call this overthinking, and it creates unnecessary anxiety that interferes with learning. Once I stopped treating every conversation like an examination, my listening became calmer, my speaking became smoother, and my confidence quietly grew. Not because my English suddenly became excellent, but because my fear slowly became smaller. That change affected every part of my daily life in America. I became more comfortable talking with neighbors, asking questions at stores, attending school meetings, and joining community events. None of those conversations were perfect, yet almost all of them ended successfully. The more experiences I collected, the more evidence my brain received that mistakes were not disasters. They were simply part of communication. My daily routine also changed in surprisingly simple ways. I no longer force myself to study for hours. Instead, I built small habits that felt natural. Every morning I read a few pages from an easy English story while drinking coffee. During household chores, I listened to slow English conversations instead of worrying about understanding every single word. At dinner, I challenged myself to describe one interesting moment from my day in English, even if the sentences were short. Those tiny habits never felt exhausting, which is exactly why I kept doing them. Behavioral scientists often explain that consistency beats intensity because small actions repeated every day gradually become automatic. Looking back now, I understand that I was never really learning English. I was learning patience. English simply became the path that taught it. Today my English still isn't perfect, and perhaps it never will be. But my confidence no longer depends on perfection. My marriage has grown stronger through honest conversations. My children have shown me that love listens beyond grammar. My home has become a place where mistakes are welcomed because they remind us we are still growing. If there is one message I hope every viewer carries from this story, it is this. After 20 years, my English may still be broken in places, but my life is beautifully whole. The greatest success was never speaking like a native speaker. The greatest success was refusing to let imperfect English stop me from living a full, joyful, meaningful life, one conversation at a time. The American lesson nobody told me. The biggest surprise after living in America for more than 20 years was not discovering a new way to learn English. It was discovering that English was never the hardest lesson. The hardest lesson was learning how people build trust. I wish someone had told me this years ago, because I spent far too much time memorizing words while completely missing the invisible rules that quietly shape everyday life. If you ask most people what they think success in America looks like, many will answer with fluent English, a perfect accent, or a high-paying career. I believed those things mattered more than anything else. Then one ordinary afternoon completely changed my mind. I was invited to a small neighborhood gathering where families simply brought homemade food, chatted in the backyard, and watched their children play together. I remember standing there holding a bowl of salad, silently rehearsing English sentences in my head before speaking to anyone. I worried about pronunciation. I worried about grammar. I worried about saying something embarrassing. Then something unexpected happened. Nobody cared how elegant my English sounded. They smiled, introduced themselves, asked about my family, laughed about everyday life, and patiently listened whenever I searched for the right word. I walked home that evening realizing I had spent years preparing for an exam that nobody else was giving me. What people remembered was not my grammar. They remembered my smile, my kindness, and the fact that I genuinely listened to them. That evening quietly became one of the most valuable English lessons of my entire life. From then on, I started paying attention to something much deeper than vocabulary. I watched how people interacted with one another. I noticed that many Americans value punctuality because arriving on time communicates respect. I noticed that saying thank you, I appreciate it, and take care was more than simple politeness. Those small phrases created warmth and trust. I noticed that when someone asked, "How are you?" they often appreciated a friendly, positive response before moving into a deeper conversation. These social habits were never complicated, yet understanding them made communication feel much more natural. Researchers who study social psychology often explain that first impressions are shaped more by warmth and reliability than by technical language. Skills. In other words, people usually remember how you made them feel long before they remember exactly what you said. That idea completely changed the way I approached English. Instead of chasing perfect sentences, I focused on becoming a better listener. I smiled more. I made eye contact. I asked simple questions. I became curious about other people's stories instead of worrying about my own mistakes. Ironically, the less I focused on sounding impressive, the easier conversations became. My husband noticed the difference almost immediately. One evening he smiled and said, "You don't seem nervous anymore." He was right. The fear had slowly disappeared because I finally understood that communication was never a performance. It was a relationship. That lesson reached into every part of my daily life. Parent meetings at school no longer felt frightening because I knew teachers cared more about working together than hearing perfect English. Conversations with neighbors became enjoyable because I stopped apologizing before speaking. Even simple trips to the grocery store felt different because I realized every small conversation was another opportunity to practice confidence. Instead of perfection, my children also learned something important by watching these changes. They saw that respect is shown through actions as much as words. They watched neighbors help one another after storms, families volunteer together during community events, and friends support each other during difficult times. Those experiences taught all of us that language is only one part of communication. Character speaks even louder. Looking back now, I realize America gave me a lesson I never expected. A whole life cannot be built on perfect grammar alone. It is built on honesty when conversations become uncomfortable, patience when misunderstandings happen, responsibility when promises are made, and kindness when someone else struggles just as you once did. My English still carries an accent. I still pause sometimes while searching for the right word. But those pauses no longer define me. What defines me now is the confidence to keep speaking, the willingness to keep learning, and the gratitude for every conversation that reminds me how far I have already come. If you are listening to this story today because you feel discouraged about your English, I hope you remember the lesson that changed my life forever. The people who truly matter are not waiting for you to speak perfectly. They are waiting to meet the real person behind your words. And the moment you stop hiding behind the fear of making mistakes may become the exact moment your life begins to feel whole, even while your English continues to grow one beautiful conversation at a time. Broken English, strong marriage. There was one question I avoided for years because I was afraid of the answer. What if my imperfect English slowly damaged the people I loved the most? It sounds dramatic now, but at the time that fear felt completely real. Every misunderstanding with my husband felt bigger than it actually was. Every forgotten word sounded louder inside my head than it did in the room. I quietly believed that one day my mistakes would become too exhausting for everyone around me. Then one ordinary evening proved how completely wrong I had been. My husband and I were preparing dinner together after a long day. I was telling him about something that had happened earlier, but halfway through the story I completely forgot an important English word. I stopped talking, closed my eyes for a second, and laughed at myself. Years ago, that moment would have ended the conversation. Instead, my husband smiled, pointed at the object I was trying to describe, and asked, "This one?" I laughed even harder and nodded. We finished the conversation without any frustration. Dinner was ready 20 minutes later, and by dessert we could barely remember what word I had forgotten. That tiny moment taught me something unforgettable. Love does not disappear because someone forgets a vocabulary word. Fear disappears when someone makes you feel safe enough to keep talking. Looking back now, I realize I had spent years fighting the wrong battle. I thought I needed perfect English to protect my marriage. In reality, what protected our marriage was patience. Researchers who study healthy relationships consistently find that successful couples are not couples who never misunderstand each other. They are couples who repair misunderstandings quickly with empathy, humor, and mutual respect. Suddenly my life made perfect sense. We were never succeeding because our conversations were flawless. We were succeeding because neither of us expected perfection. We expected honesty. We expected effort. We expected kindness. Those expectations built a much stronger foundation than perfect communication ever could. My children accidentally reinforced that lesson almost every day. Sometimes they corrected one of my English expressions. Sometimes I misunderstood one of their jokes. Sometimes all of us laughed because I accidentally changed the meaning of a sentence without realizing it. Those moments became family stories instead of family problems. Years later, we still laugh about many of them together. What once embarrassed me now reminds me how much we have grown. Psychologists often explain that shared laughter reduces stress and strengthens emotional bonds because it tells the brain that a difficult situation is actually safe. Without realizing it, our family was transforming language mistakes into memories instead of worries. That simple habit changed the emotional atmosphere inside our home. Living in America also helped me understand another important truth about relationships. Every family faces misunderstandings, even when everyone speaks exactly the same language. Husbands misunderstand wives. Parents misunderstand children. Friends misunderstand each other. Perfect grammar has never guaranteed perfect communication. Listening carefully, asking gentle questions, and giving people the benefit of the doubt matter much more. Once I understood that, I stopped blaming English for every uncomfortable moment. Sometimes the real problem was simply that people needed more patience, not better vocabulary. That realization removed an enormous weight from my shoulders. Instead of trying to become a perfect speaker overnight, I focused on becoming a calmer communicator. I slowed down. I listened before reacting. I asked, "Can you explain that another way?" instead of pretending I understood everything. Surprisingly, those habits improved not only my English, but every important relationship in my life. Behavioral scientists often describe communication as a skill built through repetition rather than talent. Every honest conversation strengthens the brain's confidence. Every successful interaction reduces future anxiety. Looking back, I see that this is exactly what happened to me. Confidence did not arrive suddenly. It quietly accumulated through hundreds of ordinary conversations that ended much better than I expected. Today, after more than 20 years, my English still carries imperfections. I still pause. I still search for words. I still smile when I accidentally say something in a funny way. But those moments no longer define who I am. My husband sees the woman who has never stopped trying. My children see a mother who taught them that courage is more valuable than perfection. My friends see someone who genuinely cares about listening as much as speaking. And I finally see something I could not see for so many years. Broken English never built a broken marriage. In many unexpected ways, It built a stronger one because it taught us to slow down, to listen more carefully, to laugh more often, and to love each other beyond words. If this story has taught me anything, it is that the strongest relationships are not created by perfect conversations. They are created by imperfect people who refuse to stop talking, refuse to stop caring, and refuse to stop choosing one another every single day. Perhaps that is the most beautiful language any family will ever learn. The habit that changed everything. If I could go back 20 years and leave one handwritten note for the younger version of myself, it would not contain a list of difficult English words or complicated grammar rules. It would contain only one sentence. Stop waiting for confidence before you begin, because confidence is quietly waiting for you at the end of the journey. I did not understand those words back then. I believed motivation came first, action came second, and results came last. My real life in America taught me the exact opposite. Action came first. Tiny progress came next. Confidence arrived quietly, almost without asking for permission. That discovery became the greatest surprise of my entire story. Many people imagine there must have been one dramatic moment when everything suddenly changed. They expect a miracle, an unforgettable speech, or a life-changing event. The truth is much less exciting and much more powerful. My life changed because of 5 or 10 ordinary minutes repeated almost every single day. Every morning while drinking coffee, I read one short English story instead of scrolling endlessly through my phone. While folding laundry, I listened to slow English conversations instead of worrying about every unknown word. During dinner, I challenged myself to tell my family one simple story about my day using the English I already knew instead of wishing for vocabulary I had not learned yet. None of these habits felt impressive. That is exactly why they lasted. Behavioral scientists often explain that the human brain resists dramatic change, but adapts surprisingly well to small, repeatable routines. Tiny habits require less mental energy, making them easier to maintain over months and years. Looking back now, I realize I was never building perfect English. I was building consistency, and consistency quietly changed everything else. One afternoon, my daughter asked me to help rehearse a short school presentation. We practiced together in the living room several times. She stumbled over a few sentences and sighed with frustration. I smiled and reminded her that nobody becomes confident by waiting until they never make mistakes. She looked at me for a second and laughed. That's exactly what you always do, Mom. You keep talking even when you forget words. I froze because I suddenly realized she had been watching me much more closely than I ever imagined. My daily habits were becoming part of her own attitude toward challenges. At that moment, I understood that my imperfect English was teaching something far greater than language. It was teaching resilience. Psychologists describe resilience as the ability to recover after setbacks instead of being defeated by them. That skill influences success in school, careers, relationships, and mental well-being. Without planning it, our family had been practicing resilience through ordinary conversations every day. Living in the United States also showed me that many successful people continue learning throughout their entire lives. I met neighbors who were learning new technology after retirement, parents returning to college, professionals taking evening classes, and grandparents proudly practicing another language just for the joy of learning. Watching them changed my definition of success. Success was no longer reaching a finish line. Success became refusing to stop growing. That lesson removed enormous pressure from my heart. I no longer compared myself to perfect speakers. I compared myself only to the woman I had been yesterday. If I understood one more sentence, smiled through one more conversation, or learned one more useful expression, then the day had already been a success. My husband noticed these changes in quiet ways. He told me our conversations felt more relaxed. My children interrupted me less because they knew I would eventually find the words. Even my neighbors began stopping to chat longer whenever we met outside because our conversations had become natural instead of rushed. None of these improvements happened because my English suddenly became flawless. They happened because my fear slowly disappeared, leaving space for genuine connection. Looking back over more than 20 years, I no longer see a woman who struggled with English. I see a woman who slowly built a meaningful life through thousands of imperfect conversations. Every small habit became another brick. Every mistake became another teacher. Every ordinary day became another opportunity to choose progress instead of perfection. If you are listening today, while wondering whether your English is good enough, I hope you remember the quiet secret that changed my life forever. You do not need perfect English to begin building a beautiful future. You only need enough courage to speak today, enough patience to continue tomorrow, and enough kindness to forgive yourself along the way. One conversation may seem too small to change your life, but thousands of those conversations, repeated with hope and persistence, can quietly build something extraordinary. My English is still growing, but my life has already become wonderfully whole, and that is a lesson I will carry with me for the rest of my journey. My English is still broken. My life is whole. If you have listened to my story from the very beginning, you may still be wondering one final question. After more than 20 years, do I finally speak perfect English? The honest answer is still no. Even today, I sometimes pause in the middle of a sentence. I still search for words that seem to disappear at the worst possible moment. I occasionally pronounce something incorrectly, smile at myself, and begin again. But here is the surprising truth that changed my life forever. None of those moments have the power to steal my happiness anymore. They no longer decide whether I deserve to speak. They no longer decide whether I belong. They no longer decide whether I can build a beautiful life. For years I believed that the ending of my story would arrive on the day my English became perfect. Instead, the ending arrived on the day I realized my story had never been about English at all. It had always been about courage. One quiet evening, after another ordinary family dinner, I sat alone in the backyard watching the sunset while my husband and children laughed inside the house. Their voices drifted through the open window, filling the air with warmth. I suddenly remembered the woman I used to be. She worried before every conversation. She apologized before making every phone call. She believed every grammar mistake erased part of her value. I wished I could sit beside that younger version of myself and gently tell her something she desperately needed to hear. You are wasting years waiting for a version of yourself that you do not need to become. That thought brought tears to my eyes because I realized how many beautiful moments fear had almost stolen from me. Fortunately, fear did not win. My family won. Love won. Hope won. Life won. Looking back now, I understand why this journey mattered so much. Every mistake taught me humility. Every misunderstanding taught me patience. Every difficult conversation taught me courage. Every ordinary day reminded me that happiness grows quietly through consistency rather than perfection. Positive psychology researchers often explain that lasting happiness is built through meaningful relationships, gratitude, purpose, and resilience instead of external achievements alone. Without realizing it, my imperfect English had slowly guided me toward every one of those qualities. I became more grateful because progress was never guaranteed. I became more patient because growth was slow. I became more compassionate because I understood what it felt like to struggle. In the end, English gave me something much greater than vocabulary. It changed my character. Life in the United States also taught me lessons I hope every viewer remembers. This country is filled with people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different accents, and different stories. Diversity is part of everyday life. Respect, honesty, responsibility, and kindness often matter far more than speaking without mistakes. Whether you are talking with neighbors, teachers, coworkers, healthcare professionals, or friends, people usually remember your attitude long after they forget your grammar. That realization removed the final burden I had been carrying for so many years. I no longer wanted to sound like everyone else. I wanted to communicate honestly as myself. That decision gave me a freedom I had searched for all along. Today our home is filled with simple routines that once seemed impossible. We cook dinner together. We celebrate birthdays together. We help our children chase their dreams. We laugh about old misunderstandings that once felt enormous. Sometimes my family still corrects one of my English expressions, and now we all laugh together instead of feeling embarrassed. Those little moments have become reminders of how far we have traveled, not reminders of what I still lack. If someone asked me today what success really looks like after 20 years, my answer would surprise them. Success is not speaking perfect English. Success is hearing my children call me mom with love in their voices. Success is seeing my husband smile across the dinner table after another ordinary day. Success is waking up every morning with peace instead of fear. Success is refusing to let imperfect language stop a meaningful life. And if you are watching this video while secretly wondering whether you should give up learning English because your progress feels too slow, please stay with your journey just a little longer. Do not measure your future by today's mistakes. Do not compare your first chapter to someone else's 20th. Speak even when your voice shakes. Read even when every sentence feels difficult. Listen even when you understand only half the story. Every small step is quietly changing you in ways you cannot yet see. One day you may look back, just as I have, and realize that your greatest achievement was never becoming perfect. It was becoming brave enough to keep going. My English is still broken. My life is beautifully whole. And perhaps that is the most important sentence I will ever speak. That's all for today. I'll make many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you don't miss them.